Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We're happy to have you all here. My name is Beth Schaffner. I'm with Peak Parent Center's Shift Project, and our webinar today is on waivers through the Medicaid system. We have a guest speaker today, Adam Tucker. I'll be introducing him in just a minute. Before I do that, I want to go over a few items so that you know how to participate today. If you're connected to the webinar through the internet, you should see your attendee interface or control panel in the upper right-hand corner of your computer desktop. By default, you're listening in today using your computer's speaker system. If you prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio panel of the control panel, and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to our presenter today by typing your questions into the questions panel or the chat panel that are located on the control panel. I'll be monitoring those, and you can send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will be addressing questions at certain time periods, and then we will have a 10 to 15 minute time period at the end to go over any other questions that folks have at the end. So there are some handouts available to download in the handout window, and so please feel free to use those. And as you leave today's webinar, you will receive an evaluation summary about the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you would take just a minute to complete that and provide us with your feedback about the webinar. So again, welcome to today's webinar, Navigating Systems, Medicaid Waivers. Our speaker today is Adam Tucker. He works for the Colorado Department of Healthcare Policy and Finance, and he will tell you more about himself and about his role as he gets started. I do want to tell you also that some of the information, if any of you are from a state other than Colorado, some of the information today that Adam will address will be relevant for your state because he is going to present some of the federal perspective, but then down to some of the specifics, there may be differences. Adam will be happy, and Peak will be happy to help guide you to the specific information you need if you are involved in another state. So without anything further, I want to welcome Adam and thank him very much for helping us out today by presenting this webinar.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Again, my name is the Medicaid, the department in Colorado that oversees Medicaid services, and I work specifically in the Office of Community Living, which oversees all of the Medicaid waivers or the home and community-based services. And so hopefully today we're just going to go kind of briefly over what Medicaid is, get a little bit more in depth around what waivers are, and then really kind of talk about what the shift in kind of the idea behind services for adults. And so really ways to be thinking, especially for folks who are working or who are family members of somebody who is starting to think about what happens after high school, and how to really kind of use the services and supports that are within Medicaid to live an integrated life of their choosing. And so hopefully there'll be some good information coming out of there, and that'll be useful. So my background really quick is I've worked for the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing for close to 5 years. And prior to that, I was a case manager. And I worked mainly with folks, most recently, mainly with folks with persistent mental health disorders who also had an intellectual and developmental disability. And I mainly worked with those folks who were also experiencing homelessness, and did that here in Colorado as well as Montana. And then before that, I was a DD case manager down in New Mexico and worked on the Navajo Nation and the Zuni Pueblo. So I have kind of a long experience in working on disability rights and disability services and different things like that. So without further ado, let's hop in. One little side note is that the version of this PowerPoint slide deck that you have that you can download, some people may notice that on the front page at the bottom there it says October 2018 of the one that's being displayed right now. When you download this presentation, it'll actually say October of 2017. We just caught that about 2 minutes ago. That's why I changed it for the one that you're seeing on the webinar. But I miscounted my years when I was putting this together. So just so everybody knows, they're exact same thing except for that one little thing there. So I have to contractually say this. Our mission at Healthcare Policy and Financing is to improve healthcare access and outcomes for people we serve while demonstrating sound stewardship of financial resources. Really what that means is we're not necessarily looking for the cheapest way of doing things, we're looking for the best way of doing things. And our belief really is that on one hand, making sure that people are living in their own community and outside of institutions is not only the cheapest way to do things, but it's also the best way to do things. And so we want to be good stewards of taxpayer money, and the best way for us to do that is to make sure that supports and services are really supporting people in living a full life and a life of their choosing. So just really quickly, these are the topics that we're going to go over quickly today, and we'll start off here with Medicaid 101. So for a lot of people, I'm sure a lot of people know this, but I always feel it's a good basis because the waivers are actually something, or the home and community-based services are actually something that are embedded within Medicaid. And eligibility is really looked at on two different levels. To be eligible for Medicaid, that's a financial eligibility. It's free and low-cost public health care. It's the largest health insurer in the state of Colorado, and it has a benefits package that ranges from mental health services through home and community-based long-term services and supports, but also doctors getting normal medication, working with hospitals, all of those kinds of things. That's really what Medicaid is. And to just be on straight Medicaid so that you can access a doctor or you can access hospitals or any of those kinds of things, that's a financial eligibility piece. And so we'll also get into some of the flexibility that has a little bit later on in this presentation. But just so that people know, one of the most important parts is you have to be financially eligible for Medicaid to then be able to utilize home and community-based waivers. And so home and community-based waivers, which will be the next section, is actually a functional eligibility. And so there's a lot of confusion around that a lot of times. If you are on a waiver, you are on Medicaid, and you have to be on Medicaid to be on a waiver. So just so people can understand that. When you're thinking really about Medicaid and really how to support somebody for signing up for Medicaid, is you always have to start with getting financially eligible for Medicaid. And then signing up through that, you can use the PEAK website, or you can outreach a single entry point, and I'll show you a map and a way to actually get into that. The other thing to also know, especially when you're working with folks who are under 18, is there's also the Katie Beckett rule. And the Katie Beckett rule is an important thing to just know about and to be asking questions about. And really what the Katie Beckett rule basically says is that if somebody has significant disabilities and that the only way that they'll be able to maintain a stable life within the community and not going to institution is by having long-term services and supports, there is actually the Katie Beckett rule, which allows for the family's resources or financial resources to be overlooked and just to be looking at the child's resources. So that makes a lot more people eligible a lot quicker for Medicaid. So the next thing that in kind of the subcomponent that I really work with are home and community-based Medicaid waivers. And so what Medicaid or home community-based services are is that they provide all the same services that are under normal Medicaid, but then they also kind of go that step further. They're really designed to support individuals with disabilities in maintaining a life of their choosing and be integrated within their community. And so we have a few different waivers in the state of Colorado, and one of the ways that you become eligible for that is first that financial piece, and that financial piece means that you are eligible for Medicaid. Then there's the level of care, which is what type of disability, what's going on with this individual, and do they meet that targeting criteria that fits in with a waiver of some kind. In the state of Colorado, we have 11 total waivers. We have 2 specifically for individuals who are adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We also have 2 waivers that are for children. And one of them is currently going through a major revamp. And that is the child, it's called CHIRP. And in that one has the residential services within it. And so over the next couple of years, it'll be interesting for everybody to pay attention to what's going on with CHIRP, especially for younger kids who really do need supports that might be outside of the home. That's where CHIRP is going to come into. We also have waivers in the state of Colorado specifically for individuals with brain injuries, specifically for individuals who may be elderly, blind, or disabled. We also have a waiver that's specifically for individuals with persistent mental health disorders. So there's a wide array of waivers, and all of them have supports and services in them that are targeted directly towards that certain population. So one of the things is that this is where it starts to get a little complicated, and really to kind of get signed up for a waiver and to get signed up for Medicaid, we have 2 different entities that do that. One of them is called a single entry point, or a SEP, and the SEPs are the case management agencies that oversee waivers that work with folks who have spinal cord injuries, children with life-limiting illness, children with physical disabilities, folks with mental health disorders, brain injuries, folks who are blind and disabled, and then the elderly. So the SEPs oversee that kind of cohort of individuals. Now, the SEPs are all over the state. There's one in each county, at least one in each county. In most counties, the SEPs are the actual county offices. So that's always a good place to actually start. And if the county office is not that single entry point or that SEP, they can point you in that right direction. But also with the resources that resource page that you're able to download, there are some links there that will help you find the correct SEP. Now, if you are working with somebody, if you are someone, or if you're a family member of somebody who has an intellectual and developmental disability, the case management agencies are called community center boards, or CCBs. And there are a total of, I believe, 11 in the state of Colorado. I can't believe I forgot that off the top of my head. But there is one in all communities. Sometimes they even overlap. Like here in Colorado Springs and Pueblo, there's some overlap with the 2 CCBs of Blue Sky and TRE, or the Resource Exchange. And those are the folks that are really good, and those are the folks you want to outreach about eligibility for one of the IDD waivers, the Developmental Disability Waiver, the Supported Living Services Waiver, the CES waiver, Child Extensive Services Waiver, or that CHIRP waiver. Those are the folks that you do want to outreach. And so with that, they help with intake, screening, referral. They also help with eligibility. They're the ones who are the case managers. So they're actually the ones who help and support the development of the person-centered plan. And they also, because of that role, one of their main roles is to help set up and to support individuals in finding providers, and also advocating with the individual to make sure that the services and supports that they need are actually being delivered correctly and in the way the person needs them. And so that's the CCB's role. So there's a couple of things to know again is that there's one of the links on that resource page that you're able to download is a link to where to find your current CCB or where that CCB is. They're always a great place to start. It's always recommended that if somebody is going to need a waiver and you can already identify that from when they're a young kid, is to start to really reach out to the CCBs around the age of 14. You can start working on eligibility even though somebody will not be on an adult waiver until they're 18. You can start getting eligibility and start getting on the wait list for the DD waiver at the age of 14. The other piece with that is that also leads off to make sure that you're also contacting that CCB and those case managers as early as you can. Kind of bring them into the conversation. Doesn't mean that they have to be at every single meeting or coming out and seeing you every month or every 6 months or whatever. But it's also more about individuals learning what the CCB system looks like, what it feels like, what kind of questions to ask, all of those kinds of things. Especially as folks are starting to move up into sophomore, junior, senior year, it's also not a bad idea to start to outreach that CCB and request that the special ed teacher contact the CCB and invite a case manager from that CCB to be part of that IEP meeting. That is something that is very doable, and it's something that, because both the IEP and in the service planning process within the waivers, they're both person-centered, and the individual who is in services and or their guardian, if they're under 18, has the right to invite the individuals that they feel need to be at that meeting. And especially for folks who are starting that transition process out of high school, it's really, really important that the adult world and the school world are starting to kind of work together. It's still pretty clunky in the state of Colorado, I'm not going to lie, but the sooner you can pull those two worlds together, the better it's going to be, especially for folks who are going to stay in school after they're 18. So you can start to utilize waiver services after school, during summer, during Christmas break, during all of those different times. And it's really important to start to build the relationship between the education system or the school and that CCB so that they can braid and blend the funding. So that to make sure that wherever the education piece, that education money kind of stops, that the waiver money can start there and can support an individual in still maybe having a job in the community during the holiday break, working at a candle shop in a mall, having somebody work there, but they may need some supports and services to be able to do that, like job coaching. And to be able to do that, you can utilize the waiver even if the individual is still in school. And so that's something that's another really important reason to really start to try to bring those folks together. Do we have any questions so far?
There are no questions submitted yet, Adam, but I just wanted to clarify one thing.
Sure.
The PEAK website, you're talking about a different website than the PEAK Parent Center website.
Yes,
sure.
I am.
Could you talk about?
Yeah, sorry about that. So the main website that I'm talking about is the Healthcare Policy and Financing website. And if you download that resource guide, it's the very, very first link on there. The following links that fall underneath that are actually, except for the very last one, are all links to that same website. And what I can recommend is that people hop on that website, and we have gotten much better over the last year or so to actually put in, if you type in the search button, it's right at the top right-hand side of when you get onto that website. You can search things like waivers, home and community-based services, SLS, buy-in, different things like that, and it will take you right to those pages. And so get on. I just recommend that everybody hop on there and just take a little bit of time and kind of walk through some of those different things and some of the different resources that are on that page, including some crosswalks about what the different waivers do, different things like that. Yes, and I also want to warn you guys that, again, it's Medicaid, so it can be a little overwhelming. So the sooner you guys can start, and the sooner you guys can, the longer you can take to digest some things and to think things through, the better and the easier it's going to be in the long run. So here is the map of the different CCBs. So anywhere you see a number, that's actually where the CCB is located, their main central office. And then that shaded in area. So like if you look at number 12, where Moffett, Route, Jackson, Grand, and Rio Blanco is, that number 12, that's an entire CCB region right there. As you can see down in Colorado Springs, there's one. But then there's some overlap kind of once you get into Douglas and Jefferson County, different places like that. But again, this is directly off of our website. And actually, when you hop on the website, you can actually click on the number and it will take you, it will show you the contact information for that CCB. So the next thing that I want to talk about, and this is kind of where I feel like the meat of all of this is really around that there is a new set of federal rules that came out a few years ago, and we are working to implement those rules, and they are called the Home and Community-Based Final Settings Rule. And really what this is it's a shift in the way that adult services are looked at and thought about. It's an idea that no longer should people be living in segregated settings, but that they should have full access to their community in a way that they want to have access to that community. And that by doing that, that will allow people to live more normal lives, quote unquote normal lives, that people should have access to work. No matter the severity of their disability, they should be able to have access to work and to have access to the community when they want to have access to that. And so the final settings rule really is also pushing the person-centered planning process. And I know that here at Peak, person-centered planning is a huge thing. Well, the cool part about the settings rule, there's a lot of cool things about the settings rule. I can do a whole half-day thing about the settings rule, but one of the cool things about the settings rule is that person-centered planning is actually now codified in federal law. That is the service planning process that everyone has to use. And the nice thing about person-centered planning is that it really is this idea of what is the person, what are their wants and what are their needs, and how do we build a system, a service plan system around that person to be able to support them in both of those things. One of the stories that I tell in this, just to reiterate where person-centered planning can go, is that when I was a case manager in New Mexico, I was working with a young guy who was just leaving high school, and this was his first time that he was doing a person-centered plan. And so I sat down with him and his family and a couple of his therapists and different things like that. And the first question that I asked him was, what do you want to be when you grow up? And without even skipping a beat, he said, I want to be Spider-Man. And there was kind of some chuckles in the room, like, you know, how can you be Spider-Man? Any of those kinds of things. But there were also some really wise people in that room. And the wise people kind of spoke up and they just asked him, what do you mean? What does Spider-Man mean to you? What does that actually do for you? Who is Spider-Man to you? And through that process, what we were able to do through a person-centered process is we were able to identify that to this individual, what Spider-Man meant was that he wanted to help people, he wanted to be part of his community, and he wanted to learn how to climb stuff. And the last thing is he also liked to dress up. And so this was about 10 years ago in a very small town before Comic-Cons and all of those kinds of things. So that one was actually a little bit more difficult for us. But from there, by just saying those things, he wanted to help people, he wanted to be part of his community, he wanted to learn how to climb, and that he liked dressing up. Those became his goals. Those were the goals that we then set up. Then once we had those goals, we were able to then step back even further and go, okay, this person has some stuff that because of his disability, he's going to have some barriers to be able to achieve some of this stuff. Because of that, what are the services and supports that we can then wrap around him to help him maneuver around those different barriers that disability is also presenting? And so we looked at services and supports as not something to fill his time, but as a way to help him achieve the things he wanted to achieve. And so one of the things that we did was we helped him find a climbing partner, somebody who could come in and teach him how to climb. And it was the coolest thing because the 20 people were working with him. And we were down in Farmington, New Mexico, which is right next to Durango. So there's lots of climbers down there. And we found this climber. And the climber comes on a Saturday, super excited to work with this guy. And this guy, he learns how to tie the knots. He is ready to go. He's super excited, totally into it. His staff is standing down there. His case manager is there. His parents are there. Everybody's super excited. And the climbing instructor said the first thing you need to learn is you need to learn how to rappel because you need to learn how to trust the ropes. And so he was super gung-ho about it. He actually gets all tied up, everything, gets to the edge, and he looks down and he goes, nope, I'm not going to do that. And there was this kind of wave within this group that was there with him of not disappointment, but because we were following this person-centered planning process, we were helping him go to the limit where he wanted to go. And we were not holding him back. He reached the limit he wanted to be at, and he stopped. And that was totally allowed, just like it is in everyone else's lives. And that's the beauty of person-centered planning. It's not to achieve the goal for the person, it's to support the person in achieving the goal, or up until that point that they're done with it, that their interests change, or they don't want to do that anymore. The other really cool thing was we actually helped him find a job to help people. Became a volunteer at the local hospital. And I actually checked in a couple of years ago with him, and I hadn't seen him for about 10 years. I happened to be down there. And I checked in with him, and he actually had a job now at that hospital and was working and paying. He was working about 30 hours a week. He had a job coach about 1 day out of the week. And he also ended up being able to volunteer in the child cancer ward, where he would come in dressed up as Spider-Man and hang out with the kids. So that was all done through that person-centered planning process. And that's why it's so important to know that process, to understand that process, because that is the process that will be used to set up somebody's services and supports. And the more that you guys, especially as parents and individuals who are needing these services or have a loved one who needs these services, it's really important to know that process and how that process should work so that you are a better advocate, because you have to remember that you are equal, and actually if you're the individual, you are above all the professionals that are sitting around that table, that case manager, everybody else. You are the boss. And if this is a goal that you want to achieve, and there are services and supports that you need to be able to achieve that goal, you have the right to those goals if you are eligible for waiver services. And as a family members, you are not the boss, but you are equal to a case manager or to anybody else. And by understanding how that person-centered planning process works, you are much better able and equipped to be able to maneuver the system and to make sure that service planning, the actual plan that comes out of that process, is actually designed and curtailed towards the person and their wants and their needs. So the very last thing, and then, oh, perfect, I'm still on time. I tend to talk a lot, so sometimes I kind of go over. So the last piece here is really to be thinking about integrated lifestyles. And that even though here in the state of Colorado, even there's still a lot of segregation. And for folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities and disabilities as a whole, you know, kind of the history was about 100 years ago, people were still living kind of locked away in basements and in attics and different things like that, and all care was left up to the family. And over time and through evolution, there was a lot that kind of came from that. And the belief was it wasn't right for people to be living that way. So there started to be the idea of institutions. And institutions started to be opened. And at that time, institutions were revolutionary. And they were better than living in a basement or living in an attic or being segregated away by the family. And so institutions for a long time were kind of the go-to thing. And at the time, in the evolution of kind of our social norms, they were the best thing for a while. And then institutions became overrun, and there was also some idea that, no, why aren't people actually just living in their own community, different things like that. And so really what happened was there was this idea that we need to start moving people into the community. And that happened in a couple of different ways. In a couple of states, that actually happened through lawsuits. And in a couple of other states like Colorado, it just happened organically. And we started to move people out of institutions and back into the community. The thing is we really never got rid of the institution, right? You still see a lot of segregation through services that are quote unquote in the community. Somebody living in a group home with 8 other people feels a little segregating. Somebody who really lives in a group home and then is bussed into a day setting where they hang out in one room all day, and they work on the same thing every day, and they don't really get a lot of time to be in the community. That's really segregating. So now with the idea of the settings rule, which is now just starting to be implemented, the movement really is a way of moving fully away from that institution or that medical model and really be thinking about integration. And I am not going to sit here and lie and say that we do not have services that segregate. We absolutely have services that segregate people. And one of the things that we are working on is we're really working on balancing what that means. We do have people who have been going to a day hab, a segregated day hab for 30 years, and they love that day hab. And so how do we support them in starting to learn and starting to grow outside of that day hab and looking at their community in a different way? Is that even possible for some people? But what we are super excited about and what we really see great strides in this being is with transition-aged youth. And the idea that transition-aged youth do not understand what a day hab is. They don't understand what sub-minimum wage is or a pre-vocational setting, which is an employment setting that is very segregating. They don't know what those things are. So let's start working on not even allowing some of those things to be an option for folks, so that community integration just becomes part of their life. And so that's a huge piece here. And so what I would hope that people really know, and if you have time to really sit back and go, okay, Medicaid and the waiver system is this huge, complicated beast, and it really is. What's the best thing for me to know? What's the best thing for me to learn with my limited amount of time of working, of maybe supporting somebody with a disability, of being somebody with a disability? I have limited time. So what are the things that I should be focusing in on? And the two biggest things is understanding person-centered planning process, but then also understanding what the case manager is. What is the case manager's role? What do they have power over? What can they do and what can they not do? Because especially in the state of Colorado, we see a lot of turnover in case management. And so you have a lot of folks who are coming directly out of college who are really excited. They have really a lot of energy, very passionate about stuff. And they come into this really complicated system and they don't necessarily know right off the bat how to navigate it. And as folks who need to live within that system and need to utilize that system, it is a great idea to learn about what their role is so that you can support them in actually fulfilling that role and actually helping them know what they can and cannot do. And when you need to fully push back, you can fully push back. And so really understanding case management and what that role is, that case managers control the budget of somebody's services and supports, that they are the ones who finally approve and sign off on the person's support plan. They are the ones who do all of those things. And so they have a lot of strings and a lot of power that they can pull and use to make sure that people are getting the services and supports that they need. And so if you have time to learn one aspect of the waiver system, the best thing to learn is the case management role and what that case manager can do. And then on top of that, in the person-centered planning process the actual process does not take long to understand it. I could probably tell you it in 45 minutes and you have a really good idea of what's going on. And to tell you the truth, one of the best trainers around that and some of the most knowledgeable people around that is Peak Parent Center. So reaching out to the Peak Parent Center and having them support you in understanding that process, but also understanding advocacy and how to better advocate. And the Peak Parent Center and the ARCs in the state of Colorado are some of the best organizations that do that. And so depending on where you are in the state, having those access to those people so that you can learn about case management and those other aspects is going to set you guys apart and is going to really help ensure that somebody who needs services and somebody who is working or living within the system has a fully integrated and fulfilling life. The other thing that I just want to touch base on, and there's some links in there, is also the idea that as people are living a more integrated life, there's some complications that come with that when it comes to supports and services. One of those is that Colorado is an employment first state, and we're working to make sure that people who have disabilities across the board, that their first and most preferred outcome is that they work, that they have a legitimate role and a valued role within the community where they can make money. Well, that comes with complications, right? Because you have all of these different benefits and all of these different things that really you have to kind of keep wrangled to make sure that somebody doesn't lose waiver benefits because they're making too much money or something like that. So one of the things I always want to point out is that Medicaid in the state of Colorado has, and it is included in the supported living services waiver, does include buy-in. And what buy-in is that somebody can make up to 350% of the federal poverty line, which I think for an individual is about $1,200 a month, and still buy into Medicaid. And what that does is it's a small premium, just like somebody who is working in and who has health insurance through their employer, how you pay that premium. That's the same kind of idea, but it's based truly on the income of the person. And so I think somebody who's making $1,200, and don't quote me on this, but I do believe somebody who's making $1,200 a month maybe pays, I think, $25 a month for Medicaid. We're not talking about a large amount of money, and especially because that keeps you eligible and able to actually utilize the supported living services waiver. The other thing is the early and periodic services diagnostic and treatment. You're always going to hear that called EPSDT. EPSDT is it's different than the waivers. It is an entitlement. So that means that anybody under up until their 22nd birthday is entitled to have certain medical services if they are deemed eligible for those things. So if somebody really needs personal care, let's say somebody let's say we have a family of 2 parents and 4 kids, and one of the kids has a pretty significant disability and needs a lot of support in the morning so they can get out to school. And what families, we hear this a lot of families, of course, have a pretty hard time dealing with that because there's 2 parents trying to get 4 kids ready to go off to school, and one of them needs extra time. Well, under EPSDT, the individual with the disability actually has the right to, because through medical necessity, actually has a right for personal care. So what that means is they can actually have somebody come in who is qualified to come in the morning and actually support that one individual in getting ready for school. The other thing that EPSDT has, especially for younger kids, that I think is so important, is that behavioral therapies, or BCBAs, which are the therapies really used for folks who happen to be on the spectrum. And that's where a lot of that work has kind of emerged around that. That is all available to somebody who is under 18, who's up until the age of 22, up until their 22nd birthday. That is available to them through EPSDT, and they have a right to access those services. And there are not limits to that service beyond what is a medical necessity. And the nice thing is, in the state of Colorado, a medical necessity really is a very broad definition. So just so people know that. The last thing, and then we'll do questions, is everybody should be aware of ABLE accounts. ABLE accounts are one of the coolest things that's come out in probably the last decade. ABLE accounts allow people with disabilities to actually save money. They can sock away up to $15,000 a year, and up to $100,000 they can have in that account. And that top limit is actually going to increase, I believe, to closer to $200,000 here in the next year. And you can actually use an ABLE account like a bank account. You can get a debit card with it and everything else, and you can use it to do anything that goes to the individual with a disability or that the ABLE account is meant for. So what that means is if somebody's going on a trip, they can pay for that trip. They can go on, they're going out to dinner, they can use the ABLE account to go out to dinner. But they can also pay for things like home modifications or vehicle modifications, things that will help them go to school. You can pay for education with it. You can do all of those kinds of things. The other nice thing about ABLE accounts is that family members are able to actually put money in those ABLE accounts. So if somebody is excuse me, if somebody is a younger person and their parents help them set up an ABLE account under their name, their parents could actually start to sock away about $15,000 a year, and then over time that will build. So when that person becomes an adult and is living in the community on their own, they still have access to that ABLE account. The cool thing with the ABLE account is that it does not, you can have $100,000 socked away in the bank and it's not going to affect your Medicaid eligibility. And it's also not going to affect up until, I think, $125,000. It will not affect your Social Security. So it's this account that is set aside to help people who need supports and services to live in the community. It allows them to actually be able to save money beyond that $2,000. And so if you download that resource page that's up there for download, the link to coloradoable.org is actually on there. And please reach out to them. They're incredible people. They're very knowledgeable about how to do this. And one of the services they offer is actually support in getting this set up. So you can actually call them and they will help you set it up. And they will go step by step and do all of the things with you to actually get that set up and ready to go. I wanted to mention these things because these things also allow supports and services to be more flexible, to be more fluid, with the ultimate goal of having people be truly integrated in their community. And that's why these things are tools that individuals can use to ensure that they're getting not only the supports and services that they need, but they're living a life that they want to be living. So I'm open for questions and/or comments. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Adam. We will wait. I hope you'll ask questions. I know this is complicated information that we all would like more clarity on, so please use this opportunity. And maybe while folks are doing that, Adam, I'll just mention to you and to everyone that our project that's sponsoring this webinar, the SHIFT project, that we have done training in the state and will continue for a while. But what we try to promote, and it sounds very consistent with the message that you're trying to convey to, especially to families, is that to keep the focus on transitioning to a good life as a part of the community, not into services. And sometimes even the terminology I think that's used might give folks the idea that and limit people with disabilities, because the services are being seen as the end and the goal rather than the person.
Yes.
What they
absolutely. And that's really that medical model. And we are making huge strides to move away from that. And the more that people who are utilizing those services, and the more that families who are supporting individuals utilizing those services understand things like person-centered planning and understand case management roles and understand some of those other tools that they have available, the more the system will change. There's only so much that can change from a top-down effect, basically HCPF or healthcare policy and financing coming and saying you have to do this. It's much better when it comes from the individuals who's actually in services going, you know what, you may have done that for the last 20 years, but I know that you don't have to do it that way, and I want to do it a different way. And most providers out there are game to do that. They're eager to learn new ways to support people, and they want to support people in the most person-centered way possible. I also want to just mention that that if you download the presentation of the slides from today, this last slide is on there. This is my contact information. Email is the best. That's basically why I only put the email up there. Please outreach me and ask me any questions. If you guys are having issues with trying to understand the service or support or anything like that, please do not hesitate to outreach me. If I'm not the right person, I will work to connect you with the right person to answer any of your questions. The other thing too is I know that there's some professionals on the call as well. If you're working in a school or you're working in another community center and you have a group of students, parents, families, friends, anything like that, I am always willing. I just need to be invited to come out and to give this presentation or a different kind of presentation. Happy to come to parent nights at schools or at community, different community organizations. Happy to go and talk to teachers or anybody. So please just let me know, and we can set that up. And happy to either do that through webinar or if I can get there in person, to do it in person.
So we do have a few questions.
Awesome.
This first person said she needs to leave soon, and she wonders if you could talk a little more about the CES waiver and the HCBS waivers and how they are different. She said this is a question, these are questions that my families ask the most. So
kids waivers are not my expertise. I will be open to that. So the CES waiver, I really do think that, so one thing, because I know you have to go soon, is one of the resources is a waiver chart. And what the waiver chart does is it puts up all the different waivers, and there's a children's and an adult one, and it will show you the differences in that. It's a really, probably one of the best bureaucratic ways that we can show it. But the CES waiver, I do know, is more specific to folks who have intellectual and developmental disabilities with pretty high either medical or behavioral needs. And there's a lot in there, even in that one, to help people with community integration and working through that. The other piece of that too, though, is really knowing EPSDT, because there's a lot of services that are in both of those waivers that you mentioned that have actually been moved under EPSDT. So behavioral therapies used to be in both of those waivers. They're now under EPSDT, and they're no longer in those waivers. And with EPSDT, that means people have more access to it. Personal care is another one that's under EPSDT. So when you're thinking about children's waivers, I know I'm not answering your question directly, and I apologize, but when you're thinking about children's waivers, also be thinking about EPSDT as part of that whole piece. And if there's specific questions that parents have, email me and I can get you the information. I just don't know it off the top of my head.
Thanks. This is a parent who's asking, can you speak a moment about the Katie Beckett waivers? Are there automatically qualifying diagnoses? And this parent says her child has Williams syndrome.
So Williams syndrome would qualify somebody for that. Again, it goes back to with kids, it's a little different. So with kids, it's more about medical necessity. And one of the things that I would recommend that you do is outreach the CCB and mention the Katie Beckett rule. And especially if you're here, and I don't know where she's at, but if she's in Colorado Springs, TRE actually has specific case managers that only work with kids, so they know the Katie Beckett stuff pretty well. But any CCB that you contact, ask them to get in contact with a children's case manager, and they should know about Katie Beckett. If they don't, outreach me and I will get them that information. Basically, what Katie Beckett says is if somebody needs real significant supports and services, not based on diagnosis, but based on level of disability, that it's basically that they should have access to those supports and services and it doesn't really matter what their parents make, because these services and supports we're talking about are expensive. And so it can become a hardship if somebody's making, let's say a family is making $60,000 or $70,000 a year, but the services and supports for a child that they have and that they're supporting may reach into $30,000 or $40,000. So that's 50% of their income. All of a sudden, they're not making very much, and they're having a hard time. You know, median wage to live in Denver is close to $80,000 or $90,000. So they're really not making ends meet. What Katie Beckett basically says is, if it's a kid, we should only be looking at the resources of the child, so that we can make sure that we can make that child eligible to get the supports and services at an early age, because we know early intervention works better than later intervention. So I would recommend that you reach out to your CCD. You mentioned Katie Beckett. Try to be in contact with somebody who does case management for children. And if they are running into issues, have them or you email me, and I can get you the right person who knows all about it. Her name is Gina Robinson at the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing. She knows everything about Katie Beckett.
Great, thank you. Please go ahead and that parent said thank you also very much. We have a little bit more time, so please, if you do have other questions or comments, go ahead and type those in. And in the meantime, I want to mention, and just Adam mentioned about PEAK being a resource for person-centered practices, and I just want to reinforce that we would love for you to contact us if you'd like more information. We have parent advisors, for those of you who don't know PEAK, parent advisors, as well as one person in particular who is focused more on transition as a transition advisor. And we would encourage you to contact our transition or parent advisors for more info. Also, stay tuned in on the PEAK website. Sign up for the PEAK email list if you are not already signed up to get future information about what is being offered through our SHIFT project, as well as from PEAK in general. So I would also like to mention our annual Inclusive Education Conference, which is in full swing of being planned right now, and will be happening in February, on February 14th and 15th. That might be 13th and 14th. I don't have a calendar in front of me. I believe maybe 13th and 14th, a Thursday and Friday. If you haven't attended that conference in the past, we encourage you to do so. We will be having one of our keynote speakers this year at the conference has actually someone we've connected with through the SHIFT project and through the Employment First activities at the state of Colorado. He is actually a national speaker. Thank you, Pam. She just clarified it's February 14th and 15th for the conference. His name is Dale DeLeo, and he is a very inspiring and knowledgeable individual around employment and supported employment, as well as promoting the kinds of systems change that need to happen and that really are beginning to happen in Colorado to assure that employment is a priority for individuals with a full range of disabilities. And what we as parents and as self-advocates need to be knowledgeable about so that we can advocate actively with case managers, with job coaches and VR folks as we're beginning to work with them so that we can assure that transition-aged young people do have that full range of opportunities and the support they need. And thank you so much, Adam, for focusing on that too when you spoke to us about the important role that families play and that youth play in helping to support systems to make the changes
Absolutely.
that they need to make.
And so I want to tell one more story. So this I think the reason why I want to tell this story is because Beth and I were talking a little bit earlier, and it reminded me of the story that of myself, and kind of the importance of two big things. One of employment, but also one of a group of parents, or my parents, who saw themselves as equals, and who were not going to be told that they were not equal to my teachers or to anybody else. So I was in special ed since I've been in kindergarten. I have a pretty significant learning disability, ADHD, written language. I mean, the whole gamut, right? And so I was in special ed all the way through school, and I went to school here in Colorado Springs, grew up here. I'm one of the weird second generation Colorado Springs folks. And my last time that I was tested in school, I was a sophomore in high school, and the school psychologist told my mom that she did not believe that I would ever graduate high school because of the severity of my disability. And the thing that I look back upon and think about that and realize that the reason why I was successful, not just in completing high school, even though I never made good grades, in completing college, where I actually did make good grades because the system is different in college, was two big things. Is that I had two parents who took the time to understand the system, and took the time to help me navigate and learn how to navigate systems. And they didn't even necessarily know all the ins and outs, but they knew which angles to push. And if you push this lever over here, you don't have to beat your head over here. And they never took no for an answer. And they saw themselves as equals to my teachers and to any principal or to anybody else. And they saw themselves as the experts of me. And they also instilled in me that I was the expert of myself. And so those were two huge things. But then also employment. Employment was the place where I learned that I wasn't lazy, crazy, and stupid. I think a lot of folks who go through the school system, just because of how the school system is designed, and they have a disability, they're usually kind of labeled lazy, crazy, or stupid. And that's the reason why you're not achieving. You're not working hard enough. You're not smart enough, or you're just not a school person. And the thing that happened when I got a job, I started working with the Pikes Peak YMCA in downtown Colorado Springs, was all of a sudden I went into an atmosphere where there was a group of people who saw my value, who understood that I could talk myself out of paper bag, who could walk up to anybody and strike up a conversation, and be welcoming and everything else, the things that I tend to be good at. And what that did is that gave me purpose, and that gave me reason to keep struggling at school, because I knew once I had that job and I had that support at that job, and I saw value in where I could go and how I could be successful, I then saw school in a different way. I saw school as an ends to a means, that I could go to school, that I enjoyed learning, that I loved being around people, and that by completing that and then completing the college piece of all of that, that was going to lead me down the path to actually be able to do that and have a happy and fulfilling life. So those two things coming together, I still believe to this day is the reason why I was able to finish high school. And then when I got to college, it was one of the reasons why I was successful in college, because again, college is a place that looks at your talents and doesn't necessarily focus on your weaknesses. And so I always like to tell that story just as a way to be thinking about how to support people, especially when they're transitioning out of high school.
What a perfect way to close this webinar. Thank you, Adam.
Absolutely.
very, very important message, and we are very much appreciative coming. I just want to let the participants know that you will be receiving a follow-up email with a link to the recording of today's webinar. Please note that that version of the recording will not have closed captioning added. As soon as we are able to add captions to the webinar recording, we will post it on the Peak Parent Center website. And to request a certificate of completion for participating in the webinar today for recertification or other purposes, please email Pam Christie at Peak. Her email address is pchristy@peakparent.org. And thank you again, Adam.
Thank you, guys.
And to everyone attending, if you all have other questions, please contact us at Peak, and Adam has very graciously given you his email address, and I know he's very sincerely wanting you to be in touch with him so that he can help. And please remember, as you exit the webinar, to take a minute to complete the evaluation survey. We really value your feedback. Our project is going to be doing 3 more webinars during the coming school year, and we would appreciate any suggestions or needs that you might express also on your evaluation survey to give us a better idea of what more you might need around the kinds of topics related to transition, including those that Adam talked about today. So on behalf of Peak and the SHIFT Project and Adam, thanks to everybody for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.